Welcome to CropCast, a series of arable podcasts bringing you the latest information, timely updates and expert advice. In today's episode,
PCN Action Scotland was a 5-year project funded by Scottish Government. It brought together multiple companies across the potato industry to work together on the common problem of PCN.
The water availability is changing across Scotland. Maybe in the past we thought of ourselves as predominantly a wet country, even ourselves on the sunny east coast. That's no longer the case. I mean, it's projected that by 2050 the occurrence of droughts across 23 of Scotland's rivers will almost double on average. So we've seen it even in recent times there. Last year during the growing crop season of 2025, we had some periods of drought and water scarcity and crop stress.
I'm George Chalmers. In this episode, I'll be talking to two potato experts from SAC Consulting. Potato consultant Dr. Kerry Leslie, who's going to be discussing potato cyst nematode, or PCN for short, looking at its effects, what growers need to consider, what measures they can undertake, and she's also going to discuss some work that she's been involved in recently. We're also joined today by Gavin Prentice, who's a senior potato consultant, and he's going to be discussing some of his work relating to planning for water scarcity on farms. So first off, welcome along, Kerry.
Hi George, thank you for having me.
Before we get stuck into the nitty-gritty of PCN, can you give our listeners just a wee background about yourself?
So I'm Dr. Kerry Leslie. I'm one of the potato consultants with SAC Consulting, alongside Gavin, who's on the podcast with me today. My background is in PCN, so I have a PhD in PCN, so potato cyst nematodes, and I also have done a bit of work with SASA on the government side as well prior to being a consultant. Before
we go any further though, PCN, it's not just something for potato growers themselves to be worried about. There's more farmers affected than that.
So primarily PCN will affect potato crops, but it does affect other crops, as in bulbs like daffodils, because you have to have PCN-free land to grow them if they are being sold to places like America. And it will also affect growers more widely if they are renting their own land out to other growers, because there's certain specifications legally on what you can grow and what you can't grow in land that has PCN in it.
Yeah, so it's, this year especially, we've seen cereal prices. They're not great. People looking at other things, cutting back spring barley, so folk are maybe looking at renting out land for potatoes. Clearly then PCN becomes a consideration for them.
Yes.
So what exactly is PCN?
So they're microscopic worms, essentially, that live in the soil. These specific types of nematodes will hatch in response to a potato crop being planted, and then they feed upon that crop's roots, and they can affect the yield of that crop that the grower will get out of it. So they can affect financially what you're going to get out of that crop. The difficult thing in terms of management with PCN is that they last in your field a long time. Once they're there, they can be there for 20 plus years. So they're a difficult pest to manage, and it's not just a one rotation issue.
So potato cyst nematode, is that just one nematode, or is there different types?
So it's made up in the UK primarily by two separate species. So there's Globidera rostockiensis and Globidera pallida. So those are their Latin names. Most of the time we would just refer to them as rostockiensis and pallida when speaking about them. There are other species of the Globidera family or genus that can also infect potatoes, but they're not They're not really found in the UK, so not currently a problem.
So what are the symptoms in the field of potato cyst nematode?
So at low population levels, they're hard to identify. Sometimes they'll just contribute to a slightly lower yield than expected, and it's hard to pinpoint what the cause of that was. At higher population numbers, you get what we call hotspots in the field. So these are usually circular-ish patches where the plants are not growing well, they look stunted, they can sometimes go a yellowy colour, and they don't tend to produce much yield underneath. And those patches are classic signs of PCN being present. But you have to test the soil to confirm if it is a PCN problem.
And you mentioned the yield losses there. So what's a range a yield reductions that you can see?
So you can start getting a yield penalty from quite a low number of PCN essentially. So we tend to talk about PCN in terms of the number of eggs per gram of soil. You can start to see yield penalties happening from 10 eggs per gram of soil, but you can go up to hundreds of eggs per gram of soil. And at that point, PCN can cause up to 80% yield losses across a field in a perfect storm of high population of PCN and poor varietal choice if it was a susceptible and intolerant variety being chosen to grow in that field.
Okay, so it's not just a case of, right, oh, we stop growing potatoes for a few years, everything will end up fine. But then if that's the case, what's sustaining them?
They're quite hardy. So yes, you could stop planting potatoes for a couple of rotations and the population in your field of PCN will reduce, but probably not to the level of zero. When you then plant another potato crop, and it could be 15 years on from initially finding PCN, if it is a potato variety that is susceptible to PCN, then their populations will grow really quickly again, and then it just starts the cycle from day one again. So it's really about managing them across multiple rotations.
And while the number of potato growers, it may not be huge, it's certainly nothing like it used to be. Potatoes contribute a lot to the economy.
As part of the PCN Action Scotland project, which I will speak about a little bit later, there was some economic studies done recently on the impact of the Scottish potato sector to the UK economy as a whole. And I believe looking at that figure adjusted for 2025, it's up to about £5.2 billion in contribution to the UK's economy in general. So the Scottish potato sector is not small in its impact by any means.
No, and it's important to remember that a viable potato sector, it's not just vital for the businesses that are actually growing the tatties themselves. There's so many other businesses that are rely on that, whether they're renting land. There's the people who work for growers and contractors. And also there's a lot of ancillary industries that work with potato farms.
Yeah. It's a very integrated system, potato growing, and can range from seasonal potato staff in the field right the way through to commercial companies that use the potatoes downstream to make new products.
So how do we know if there's PCN in a field?
The most consistent way to see if you have PCN in your field is to test your soil. So it depends what type of potato you're trying to grow. If it's a seed potato crop, you have to have your land tested by SASA, so Scottish Government. It's a legal requirement to have PCN-free soil before you put seed potatoes in the ground. If you're growing a Waugh crop, there's no legal requirement to test, but you can test via commercial lab testing companies like those found at SRUC.
Biosecurity, hygiene, I take it that plays a big role.
Yes. So PCN are primarily spread from field to field through movement of infected soil. So if you, for example, if a grower goes into a field that has PCN, they're using farm equipment, that then leaves the infected field with infected soil on the wheelings, for example, or the underside of equipment. And then it goes into a field that doesn't have PCN and is used. The infected soil could then be dropped off, and effectively you've just spread the PCN to a new field where it can increase its population there. So although hard to do in practice for some larger commercial companies that have a lot of equipment, best practice would be to wash down farm machinery, and even just washing down boots if you've been in the field yourself. That can go a long way to stopping movement of infected soil.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a list down here that how effective is various measures. So whether it's just a quick brush to knock off any excess soil, taking an airline to something to blow away soil before you leave a field, because most tractors have got that capability now. And as you say, the gold plating measure would be getting out the power hose and using disinfectant, presumably.
Yeah. If you can leave as much soil as possible in the field before moving on to the next field or going back to the farmyard, even, that's probably best standard.
And there are other ways in terms of management. We're looking there at actual machinery and trying to stop the spread. But there's other management measures that growers can undertake as well.
Yes. So one of the best ways to reduce a PCN population is to plant a variety of potato that is resistant to PCN. So there's many varieties that are resistant to either one or the other species of PCN, or both. And growing those in the right field at the right time can dramatically reduce the population present. And we've shown through field trials that is consistently the best way to get rid of PCN populations.
So what are what varieties are would you be classing as resistant?
So for growers that want to know, there's a variety database that they can access online, but some that you might have heard of, more popular varieties. So for the species of PCN called Globardera rostockiensis, you can plant varieties like Maris piper that's resistant to rostockiensis. For the PCN species Globardera pallida, it's slightly more tricky because there's less varieties available. There's a lot of varieties that we grow inherently that have been grown for a long time in Scotland that are resistant to rostockiensis, but there's not that many of them at the moment that are resistant to pallida. One of them is the variety Elland. So that's relatively new. I think it was brought to market in 2017, but it has skyrocketed in terms of its area being grown because lots of growers want to use it for that purpose, to get rid of PCN.
And it essentially then becomes a management tool, not only just a potato, but a management tool to reduce the numbers for future crops, presumably.
Yes.
And is there any other ways that when you're planning out workloads and things like that, is there a way that growers can help reduce the risk as well?
So the PCN Action Scotland project has recently launched. It's a new online tool called the PCN Scenario Planner, and it was designed to let growers or their agronomists or whoever else is consulting with them, to input their specific PCN populations that they've got from soil testing results. And it will map what will happen to the PCN population in their field, depending on the variety of potato that they are planning to grow. So it gives you a visual output of what will happen to the PCN in their field if they put quote unquote the wrong variety in there.
And presumably at the same time, it would also show if they were to put Elland in, it would also show hopefully dropping as well.
Yes. So it allows them to model that. Different variety choices can show through this tool how big an impact they will have. And the tool also will model a predicted yield loss that would come if a susceptible variety was planted in a field with PCN.
And so for people who are renting land out, is there things that they can do? Are there other crops that act as hosts? Are there other crops that maybe help reduce numbers as well?
So it really depends on the relationship with the landowner, between the landowner and the potato grower. Some landowners are happy and more amenable to try putting in things ahead of time, ahead of potatoes, that would help reduce the PCN population. As we've said, the right resistant variety is the best way to control PCN in a field, but you can plant things like cover crops, which will also help to reduce the PCN population elsewhere in the rotation outside of potatoes.
So typical, I've heard that radish can play a big role. Is it just any old radish or is there specific ones?
Yes, so oil radish are being used as cover crops against PCN. This is because they produce certain compounds which are released into the soil, which are toxic against PCM. But not every oil radish variety produces these compounds at the same rate. So there's some varieties that are better than others. Through field trials in the last year, we've seen that the variety bento oil radish, when sown at a high seed rate, that is quite good against PCN. And other varieties include Defender, and there's one called Dracula as well.
The best will in the world, after a crop of potatoes have been harvested, there's going to be volunteers in the following years. What can farmers do about these? Because obviously they're going to be a host, presumably. How easy are they to control?
Yeah, groundkeepers are a difficulty in potato growing for not just PCN, but also other pests and diseases like aphid-borne viruses and hosted for late blight as well. So everybody involved, including the growers and their landlords, should be making a concerted effort to try and remove groundkeepers as much as possible. It is acknowledged that it's a difficult process, and not every grower has access to a field after their crop of potatoes to then go in and try and clean up the groundkeepers. As part of the PCN Action Scotland project, there has been advances in technology for spot spraying, though. So through partnership with Soil Essentials, they have developed an AI-led camera that sits on the back of a sprayer, And it can identify as the sprayer is running through a crop. It can tell a groundkeeper against the crop that is growing. So like broccoli is one of the crops it's been trained in. And as the sprayer runs over that crop, it tells the sprayer nozzle to turn on, and it will just directly target that groundkeeper. So it's targeting groundkeepers in a much more specific way, but it's also reducing the amount of chemicals that we're having to use compared with like blanket spraying of a field, as traditionally done.
Okay, and so you've spoken about PCN Action Scotland. It's a project you've been working on. Would you like to give everyone a wee bit more background on it?
Yeah, so PCN Action Scotland was a 5-year project funded by Scottish Government, and it brought together multiple companies across the potato industry to work together on the common problem of PCN. So that included members from the James Hutton Institute, us at SAC and SRUC, Scottish Agronomy, Soil Essentials, BIOS, the Plant Health Centre, and SASA as the Scottish Government partner. And so that project has just come to an end last month.
What have you been finding with it? What's the findings?
So that was it was split into 9 separate work packages. So there was lots of different topics being covered within the umbrella of PCN research. A big part of the project was multi-year independent field trials. So those were looking at resistant varieties that were somewhat new to the market. We were looking at their tolerance. So without getting too technical, a variety of potato can be resistant to PCN, meaning it will reduce the amount of PCN around it because the PCN can't feed. However, tolerance is the plant's ability to survive and grow in the presence of PCN, and they are separate topics. So some resistant varieties will do a very good job at clearing up a PCN population. However, they won't be happy about growing in those conditions, and their yield might suffer because of it. So we were looking at tolerance in field trials. As previously mentioned, we were trialing the oil radish as a cover crop. And we were also including traditional like chemical nematicides in there alongside the resistant varieties to show that they still have a place in terms of their protection of yields alongside resistance.
IPM is never far away, particularly nowadays. I take it that would have played a big role when you were maybe coming up with control strategies and such like.
Yes, so IPM was one of the work packages that we looked at. It included the oil radish trials. Also looked at other alternatives for cover crops. So there are certain varieties of plants which are in the same family as potatoes and tomatoes and the likes, which have been shown to hatch PCN, but the worms can't then feed on those crops. So they essentially hatch and then they'll die off, leading to a reduction in the population. However, a lot of these species of plants come from parts of the world that have very different climates to Scotland. So a lot of them you can find in parts of Africa, which climate-wise is not very similar to Scotland. So part of our IPM work package was attempting to grow some of these to see if we could get them to work in a Scottish context. And there was various success levels with some of those, I have to say.
So what's the next steps for the project?
So The final reports for the PCN Action Scotland project have been submitted back to Scottish Government. Alongside the final report, we had to produce a document on proposed or potential policy and legislation changes that the project partners think would help the industry in general. So it's likely that we won't see any progress with that until the conclusion of the Scottish elections in May. So it's a watch this space for that. There are more field trials planned for after this project has finished. Those are being carried out by partners of the PCN Action Scotland project, but on an individual basis. So alongside the James Hutton Institute, SAC's potato team will be looking at field trials for next year and into 2028, looking at potential new products for PCN control that could come to the market in the future. And I know that further work on oil radish varieties is being done by project partners Scottish Agronomy as well.
So then, Kerry, what's your top tips for growers regarding PCN?
So I would say knowing what's in the land first is the top tip, the first top tip. Being forewarned is forearmed. In that, if you know that there is going to be a PCN population in the field, no matter what you're wanting to grow for in terms of seed or where, then you can manage that problem the best you can, essentially. If, for example, where growers are just going to put potatoes in and don't test, they might not know that they're about to plant into a field that has a high population of PCN, and therefore they won't know that they might have a significant yield penalty coming at the end of the season because of it. So definitely knowing what you've got in the land before you plant is a top tip. As we discussed before as well, hygiene around the field is another big area. Preventing movement of soil in any volume will help in reducing the movement of PCN and the potential for infecting clean land that you may have. Knowing what variety that you're going to plant in terms of its resistance scoring as well is another top tip. We do have varieties available that are resistant to both species of PCN. If it is amenable to a grower's business, it might be a good suggestion to plant dual resistant varieties because they will reduce the population of either type of PCN in the field and go away to help fix the problem as well.
Okay, thanks a lot there, Kerry. Over to Gavin. You're perhaps in a past life you've been involved with farmers. Can you just tell listeners just a wee bit about yourself and how you've ended up at SAC, I suppose?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So essentially my background is in the potato seed supply chain. So over the past years, I've been involved in contracting different varieties of potato with growers and ultimately helping sell or allocate the stocks for the market. So I've sort of been in between the planning and production phase of potatoes for a little while now. And since joining SAC, I've moved back towards my agronomy type roots, having done some basis qualifications in the past and doing a little bit of on-farm applied agronomy as well as trial work and project work with SAC as a potato consultant along with Kerry.
So then, Gavin, how do you see PCN affecting potato growers? You mentioned decision making and such like. Is it impacting on rents, areas that they prefer to go to now? How's PCN affecting that?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. A lot of growers are finding it hard, especially seed growers, to find clean land. PCN affects all of Scotland, despite what we think, but there are definitely regions that are worse affected than others. And in that case, it means that seed land is very much restricted because you need to have it certified and with a clean bill of health from soil testing in order to plant the seed. So that is impacting land availability, also driving rental prices to a certain extent too. But from the ware growers' perspective, they need to have a management plan in place as well if PCN is found from a statutory point of view. So if it's failed seed land, but they want to put in a resistant variety to clean up that land, they must then plant a variety that is resistant, as Kerry explained previously. So it certainly it influences the market and the variety choice for the grower as well, which isn't always easy, especially when we have a market such as we're having now, where supply is high and demand is low and prices aren't very good, even in the potato sector.
So, Gavin, you've been involved in a project looking at water scarcity. You want to tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So ourselves, SRUC and SAC, along with the James Hutton Institute, University of Aberdeen and SAOS, created practical guidance for Scottish farmers and growers when looking at planning for water scarcity. And this was essentially funded by CREW. So there's lots of acronyms here, but that's the Centre of Expertise for Water. And essentially it was at the request of SEPA and Scottish Government. And the reason for that, you may ask, is that essentially the water availability is changing across Scotland. Maybe in the past we thought of ourselves as predominantly a wet country, even ourselves on the sunny east coast. That's no longer the case. I mean, it's projected that by 2050, the occurrence of droughts across 23 of Scotland's rivers will almost double on average. So we've seen it even in recent times there. Last year, during the growing crop season of 2025, we had some periods of drought and water scarcity and crop stress. So I guess the timing of the publication couldn't be better. It's in the shape of a document that can be downloaded and viewed online. You can print it out as well, but it's something for everyone and it covers all agriculture. So although predominantly based for Scottish farmers and growers, it can be used by advisors or agronomists too, with lots of handy information within.
Yeah, I think extreme weather is something that we're always hearing more and more about, and I suppose you summed it up quite well there. That January, February, we saw a lot of rain, in the last month or so. Everything dried out really, really quickly. So what were some of the key messages that came out of the project?
So I guess it's all about understanding your risk. So it's knowing your risk and planning to then know your vulnerabilities and then how to become more resilient as well, in a more sort of wider sense. But if you look at it from a crop by crop basis, if we take potatoes, for example, just because it's our wheelhorse, it's about efficient irrigation. So it's about using the water and understanding the value of the water. So, if you can efficiently irrigate and that groundwater and surface water is available to do so, you, in theory, can increase your marketable yield and your biological yield as well with good irrigation. So it's all about trying to become more resilient in weather extremes. So even as much as building a soil organic matter, for example, and understanding where you might be able to capture some water and use it more readily. So rainwater harvesting, lots and lots of different ways to do it.
It's I think the guide looks at different tools that identify risk. So what exactly is deemed a risk?
So I guess it's just knowing what the risks are. So, for example, you want to know what the hazard is, what the vulnerability is, and your exposure to those. So, knowing your risk to future changes in water availability can help you plan and reduce the impact in order to improve your farm resilience. So, within the guide, we've got a sort of 5-step plan, and also then the tools in which you can implement the 5-step plan. So, for example, step 1 is understanding your local hazard. So that's doing things like checking SEPA's water scarcity levels, which you can find online. You can access the drought risk assessment tool as well on SEPA's website, and then log past restrictions and any seasonal hotspots that you've had within your farm business or fields. Step 2, you would then want to assess your exposure. So you want to map your water sources and uses on farm. You might want to meter the peak day demands, identify high-value irrigated crops and stocks needs. So, likes of potatoes, for example, when we talked about renting land for PCN, and it's thinking about PCN when renting land, for example, you may want to think about, if you are a aware grower, how much access to water do you have, or do you have a license to access that water at all in that area? And if so, that will then influence your variety choice and market that you're going to grow for. But going back to the sort of 5 steps, there's step 3. So you want to assess your vulnerability. So that's things like, how many days of storage in terms of water do you have either on farm or around water courses, and what other water users are using that same water course for irrigation. It's knowing your backup sources and efficiency as well in your irrigation equipment. So just checking for leaks and pressures and such. Step 4, you want to build your drought risk profile. So again, you just want to know your overall risk and set triggers. And then step 5 would be then test your resilience. So that's then checking the water budget, doing a bit of a tabletop risk assessment and a live drill, and then going from there.
And it's also fair to say that it's not just the farm businesses themselves that are affected, it's a wider environment.
Absolutely, yeah. Biodiversity was obviously high on the list. We actually had Nature Scot as part of the project steering group, and they were very much interested in how we can help with biodiversity around still managing your water efficiently as well. So likes of storage lagoons for irrigation, there are ways of making sure that they're sensitive to the natural environment as well, and to the wildlife, and encouraging it and enhancing it as well.
Are there some easy wins then that farmers can take? So, low hanging fruit that farmers can take away from the project and they can implement pretty quickly, just to give them that wee bit more resilience fairly easily?
It's all all the measures are easily implemented, but there's so many different measures that it's very difficult to pick any one specific one to highlight as such. There are lots of different tools and resources that are signposted within the document, and there's also actually case studies from growers which we gathered too. So you can then see how growers are building resilience on their farm, whether that's investment in a lagoon or looking at soil organic matter and how they might contribute to that using different things and methods such as green manure. So there is lots of different tools. There is the Cranfield University de-risk tool, for example, if you're an irrigator. There is also how you might conduct a water scarcity risk assessment as another tool. What to consider when creating a weather resilience plan for your farm, and lots of bits and pieces in between. It's really just the most up-to-date information in a Scottish perspective to give you pretty much the best practice everything as best it can.
So from what you're saying then, it's not really a case of one size fits all. Growers should really go on there, use the tools for their own circumstances, and almost come up with their own bespoke plan going forward.
Yes, absolutely. if you are a livestock farmer, you're probably not going to be interested in the irrigation scheduling section, but you certainly will want to look at how you can maximise the rainwater, for example, for the livestock or such. It just depends on what your farm business needs are and requirements, and then tapering it from there. Project partners, we don't expect everyone to read the full document. We would love it if you did, but it's a case of pulling the information that is relevant to you and your business in order to understand and value water and how you can use it better to your advantage, which at the end of the day is all that we're trying to achieve. It's profitability, it's efficiency, but it's sustainability as well for the future.
Yeah, and I suppose the underlying message is that we're sitting here in April. We have no idea if this is going to be a dry year, a wet year. It's really just a case of putting plans in place. That word comes back again, gives you the resilience to be prepared, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Having sat here in January, we would never think we're talking about droughts, for example, this growing season. But as you said earlier, George, the weather has a funny way of making its average come back to fairly something similar in most years. It's just when you get that rainfall throughout the year is the unpredictable part at times. But last year was exceptional. We had a lot less rainfall, and it was clear to see. I mean, even going back to 2018, it's not in the undistant past that we had some seriously low yields because of drought scenarios and the impact that had on crops, especially rain-fed crops, where we don't have as much extra flex when it comes to irrigation. But for example, those that do have the facility, the license and capabilities and infrastructure and equipment to irrigate, the aim is to really just place the right amount of water onto crops in the right place at the right time with minimal wastage. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, making the best use of it. If you want to find out more about the PCN project, PCN in general, and the planning for water scarcity project, we've got some links in the show notes. It's also important to say that the planning for water scarcity project will also be running a series of knowledge transfer events throughout 2026, so please look out for them. Thank you for joining us for this episode of CropCast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe or follow. We look forward to seeing you again for our next episode of CropCast, and this episode was hosted by George Chalmers, produced by George Gauley, and edited by Cameron Waugh. This podcast is produced in association with the Scottish Government.
The Farm Advisory Service Podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.